Okay, so let's talk about last in, first out. So when we talked about first in, first out, that meant that the first thing that came into your warehouse was the first thing that went out. And the example we used was like milk or food that goes bad. So perishable stuff, you want the first that comes into your warehouse to be the first that goes out, right? So that's kind of a good way to think about the inventory costing when you're thinking about, what did I sell? What is my cost of goods sold? Well, the cost of goods sold, if you're looking at the list of the items, is going to be the first that came in, and that's where your cost of goods sold sits, is the first that comes in. So for LIFO, it sits at the top because the little chart you make goes in chronological order from the oldest to the newest at the bottom. So what you sold first is going to be at the top, and then the ending in bottom. Now, last in, first out. Oh, and let me mention too, again, as I mentioned before, that inventory doesn't necessarily follow this method. This is just a costing method. They call it a cost flow assumption. Sometimes it really does, like in the food industry, the first in, first out really does work that way. And in LIFO, there are some things that really do flow that way, but you don't necessarily have to have your products flow that way in order to use that costing method. It's just a method. So last in, first out. If we want to think about an actual method for this that actually works, it would be like hay, coal, or if you've ever been to like a big rock or a big Lowe's or something where they have like bulk dirt and bulk rocks and things like that that aren't in bags, but it's like in just a section. That would be last in, first out, because if we're looking at this image on the screen, if you could see this, what we would be looking at is that if we look at this pile of hay down in the bottom right-hand corner, if you could see that, the first that came in would be dumped right here at the bottom, right? Then let's say we had 3 deliveries. The next delivery would be dumped on top of it, right? And then the last delivery would be dumped on the top, on the very top, right? So this would be the last in right here on the very top, right? This would be the last in. This very top part is the last in. So if you go to make a sale of this hay, you are not going to dig all this stuff on the top out of the way, right? You're not going to move all the stuff that's on the bottom out of the way. All this stuff, you're not going to move it, right? I mean, if you're trying to do first in, first out, you'd have to move everything on the top to get to the bottom. That's what I'm trying to say. So you're not going to do that. You're not going to move everything on the top to get to the bottom. So when you make a sale of hay or dirt or anything like that in a pile, the way you're going to sell the stuff is you are going to go from what's the last that came in, what's on the very top. So you're going to sell the very top part first, and then the next sale you would sell the next, and then the next. And then maybe you had 10 sales and you would just keep working your way down the pile, okay, until you got to the very bottom, which would be the first that came in. So the way to think about this is that with, and this is kind of weird because it's the opposite of a pile, but with first in, first out, the cost of goods sold set at the top of that list, right? Because the list, remember the list that we have, this list here, the dates go in chronological order, right? January 1, April 15th, August 24, November 27. So with first in, first out, what you sold is at the top, okay? Because the first that came in is the first you sell, right? But with last in, first out, what you sold, the first that you sold is the last that came in. So it's at the bottom. The last that came in would be the most current date, okay? So that would be what you sold, the last that came in, this is at the bottom. So that's last in, first out. Again, a lot of stuff don't follow that actual flow, but the examples I gave you are ones that you can think about. Okay, so we are going to look at this example problem. This is the same one that we looked at for first in, first out, right? And we are going to figure out the ending inventory first. So just ignore the cost of goods sold right now. We're going to work through the ending inventory piece, which is down here, okay? But before we do that, we are going to pop back to our map because we have to have our map in order to know how to solve the problem, right? Because the map is the key piece for this chapter that you will definitely want to have in your notes. It's very important, okay? So let's go over here and let's go to, let me share this. Okay, and we're gonna look at the map. Okay, so we ask ourselves the questions. What type is it? Well, now we're doing LIFO. So we're gonna be looking just at the right-hand side of the map, LIFO. What do we wanna know? So I said we're gonna solve for ending inventory and cost of goods sold. So both. If you are asked for both, you solve for what is asked for first. And I said ending inventory. So we're gonna solve for ending inventory first. What's our direction? Ending inventory sits at the top, so our direction is going to be going from the top down until we get to the number of items in ending inventory. We're going to go from the top down until we get to the number of ending inventory items, okay? Units, all right? So let me go back to the PowerPoint now. And let's look at this, okay? We're looking for ending inventory now. Don't even think about FIFO. If you think about them both at the same time, it'll confuse you. Okay, so ending inventory starts at the top down. So we want to get to the number of units we have in ending inventory. Well, this problem doesn't tell us how many. We see it in the solution in the bottom left-hand corner if you can see that, but we're gonna pretend like that's not there. So how would we know how many we have in ending inventory? Well, we start with how many we had to begin with. We had a total of 1,000. We had 1,000 to start with. The problem told us that we sold 550, okay? So 1,000 minus 550, right? I can't write with this 550. 550, there we go. 550 is, and I'm just gonna draw an arrow, it's actually 450, okay? So 1,000 is what you started with. I had 1,000 books sitting on my shelf. I sold 550. How many do I have left in my inventory? I have 450 left in my inventory, okay? So let's do the ending inventory costing then for this problem, okay? All right, so we are doing ending inventory LIFO from the top down. We're gonna go till we get to 450. So top down for ending inventory for LIFO. So we're gonna take 100 units at $10 each. That's at the very top. So if we look down here in the proof, we see January 1, 100 units, $10 each is $1,000. How much more do we need to get to 450? Well, we need 350 more because we only have 100. So we're going to go to the next line down. April 15th, there's 200 units at $11 each. We're going to take all 200 because we're trying to get to 450. So we have April 15th, 200 units at $11 each comes to $2,200. And now we need 150 units more to get to 450. Now, if we look at the August 24th date, we're going to see there's 300 units, right? Do not need all 300 units. We do not need all 300 units. So we are going to take only what we need out of those 300 units. What we need. And all we need is 150 to get to our 450. So we're going to take 150 of those units, 150 of those units at $12 each comes to $1,800. So now we've got to our 450 units, and the total cost using the LIFO method of ending inventory is $5,000. Okay. Now, to get the cost of goods sold, the quickest way to get the cost of goods sold is to simply take what the total cost was of all the goods, which is called the cost of goods available for sale. That's $12,000. And you can see it comes from up here, right? $12,000. If you see the chart, $12,000 is what the cost of everything was when we started. The ending inventory costs $5,000. We just figured that out. So if we subtract the $5,000 from the $1,000 we had to start with, then we are going to see that the cost of goods sold is $7,000. $5,000 minus $12,000 is $7,000. Now, are these numbers different than when it was FIFO? Yes, they're going to be different because we're using a different costing method. We're counting in a different direction, okay? All right, so what we need to do is we need to prove that that cost of goods sold is really $7,000. It's really $7,000. So to prove the cost of goods sold, Oops. Go to the next slide here. And we're going to prove that the cost of goods sold really is $7,000. Okay, so we're going to flip back to the chart really quick because this chart should be on your notes, right? Here's our chart. We're doing LIFO. We're doing cost of goods sold. If we look at the LIFO, cost of goods sold sits at the bottom. So we're going to go from the bottom up until we get to the number of units that were sold. Bottom up until we get to the number of units that were sold. Okay? So go back to the PowerPoint. All right, so if we look here, we're going to see 550 units were sold. It told us that on the prior page. So we're going to go from the bottom up until we get to 550 units. Okay. So we have November 27th, 400 units at $13 each. So we've got 400 units at $13 each, comes to $5,200. We need 150 units more to get to 550. So we're going to go up to the next line. The next line is August 24th. There's 300 units there. And if we remember, 150 of those units were sitting in ending inventory. Well, that means 150 of them were sold. And that's what we need is 150 more to get to what was sold. So we have August 24th. We're going to take 150 of those units at $12 each for $1,800. That's going to give us our total of 550 units and the total cost of goods sold of $7,000. So we verified that, yes, the $7,000 is correct for the last in, first out costing method.